Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Carter. I'm an application engineer with Ally PLM Solutions. Hope everyone is doing well today. I want to welcome all of you to our Ally PLM NX Lunch Bytes series. I think that most of you that are live on the session are aware of what Lunch Bytes are, but if you happen to be new, Lunch Bytes are sessions where we cover a topic, a command, a set of tools that users may not be aware of. Because several of you have started loading NX10, which was released at the end of the year, this past year, we want to cover what's new in that version today. We want our lunch bites to be valuable to you, so please let us hear your suggestions on topics, and you can send those to us via email, or there's also a place on our website where you can suggest a lunch bites topic. If you have any questions regarding today's session, please just write them down and send them in an email. We have several of you online with us today, therefore you'll be in listen-only mode. Today's topic is, as I mentioned earlier, what's new in NX10 CAD. We're going to break this topic into two sessions like we typically do with what's new. We'll do half of the session today over the next 30 minutes or so, and then part two will conclude on May 21st. Our goal today is to give you some insight on what's new in NX10 CAD. There are many more items that are new, as there typically are, but we're going to focus on some of the items that will help with productivity, or maybe more fundamental items, that people would use every day, no matter what type of parts and assemblies you design. I'm a little bit under the weather today, so if I do a coughing fit, I'll try to minimize that, so bear with me. Today's agenda. What we're going to do is we're going to look at what's new in NX10 CAD, like I said, part one today. We're going to look at the user interface. We're going to look at some tools in sketching. We're going to look at some tools in sheet metal, modeling, and synchronous modeling. And then when we conclude on May 21st for part two, we'll look at assemblies and drafting. And inside of drafting in part two, we'll look at the new NX layout tools if you're wondering about them. So first of all, let's talk about the user interface or some fundamental items. First of all, just if you haven't moved to NX9 or you're looking to move from 8.5 to 10 and that's why you're watching this lunch bite, a reminder that in NX9 there was a change to the ribbon layout. There's also a change to the theme, which means a color scheme. It's kind of a lighter, whiter theme. Which you'll see in a little bit if you're not familiar. That was actually default in NX 9.0.1. The other thing we're going to look at the user preferences dialogues, how those have changed a little bit. We're going to look at some ribbon bar enhancements, which are the tool tabs. We're going to look at resource bar enhancements. These have been pretty popular to be able to have a little more flexibility with the resource bar. We'll look at some dual monitor tools and look at some options with the middle mouse wheel zoom, and then we're going to look at some options for coordinate systems and view triads. And then I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I want to make everybody aware and where they can go get more information on touchscreen mode and touchscreen gestures, and maybe even run an NX on a like a Surface Pro 3, for example. So first of all, as I mentioned, this is the newer color scheme, and if you're running at least 9.0.1, you're probably getting familiar with this color scheme unless you've changed it back, but you'll see that the user interface preferences, this light recommended, which is this lighter white, kind of green, Siemens color scheme, if you will. So that is the default in NX 10.0.0. Another thing while we're talking about user preferences, and I'm going to demo some of this for you, so I just want to lay the groundwork here. User preferences, the screens here, you'll notice that there's actually search criteria at the top, and the tabs are across the left. You see layout, theme, resource bar. This particular screenshot is from the user interface preferences, so if you went to all preferences, user interface, this would be the screen. If you've loaded NX9, you probably saw these screens in NX9 drafting, where that you can change your options for your draft files, your dimension styles, etc. in a window like this, which, like I said, has the search capability. So in this case, you see that I've went into user interface preferences. I've started typing in new role because I was looking for some role information, and you see that it gives me a list to match, and it says on roles, actions, group, there's a new role button. So then it takes me right to that screen. There's some more ribbon bar enhancements, as you can imagine. There's going to be enhancements to the ribbon bar as we go, right? With NX9 being the first version with the ribbon bar. You can now change the content and style. You can add a recently used. In certain areas of the ribbon bar, recently used will be turned on. So this is just a recently used command list. This can also be changed while in Customize. One thing I want to point out, it sounds trivial, but when you're in Customize and you're trying to customize your user interface and you're looking for a specific command, there's now a search criteria there. So in my screenshot, I typed in Snap View. You know, Snap View, you're probably used to hitting F8 on your keyboard to square up to one of the normal views. Well, you see Snap View, you can now find that. So what this allows us to do is help us find commands in the categories very easily, and maybe even some of the items that not necessarily you're used to picking a command for, you're used to, you know, doing a keyboard shortcut or something like that. Like I said, we want to look at some resource bar enhancements. Now with the resource bar, you can turn on and off tabs. I know I've had that question in the past. The pen is still available to pin it open, closed. You can maximize a tab now, just like you maximize a window inside of Windows. And then the location, you have the display on left, display on right, like we used to have inside of the preferences. But now you see there's a couple of options to help with second monitors. And then down at the bottom, we can turn on and off the tabs, as I mentioned earlier. As far as that dual monitor support, I can't really demo it here because I have one screen and that's how it's going to project across the web. But if you load NX10 and you start playing with these two options, you'll very clearly see what it's doing. So if you do the overlap on the second monitor, what it's going to do is put the resource bar on the second monitor at the edge nearest the NX window. So if I'm running NX on my primary screen, which is my left monitor, so to speak, and I have my secondary screen, my second monitor to the right of it, that means that it'll put the resource bar on the second screen towards the left, which is closer to my NX session. If I already had a program on the second monitor and I say overlap the resource bar on the second monitor, it's going to cover up the other program, right? The resource bar will be over top of it. It also allows you to maximize the other program, which means that if you maximize the other program window, then it will cover up the resource bar. Okay? If you dock it rather than overlap it, if you dock it on the second monitor, it places the resource bar on the second monitor at the edge nearest the NX window. Same thing as I mentioned earlier. So if my second monitor is to the right, then it'll put it on the left side of my second monitor. Now any program that I already have on the second monitor is pushed over to allow the resource bar to be docked beside the other program's window. If I maximize the other program, it will not cover the resource bar. It keeps it docked. So whatever real estate the resource bar is taking up on your second monitor, docked on that left-hand edge, if you maximize the other program like Excel or Outlook or whatever you have, it will not cover up the resource bar. It'll only fit the window up to the resource bar. So you'll still have kind of the dual. You'll see two items there, even if you maximize the other program. So I know that's hard to explain without showing it, but I encourage you, when you load NX10, it's very easy to see that whenever you do the overlap and the overlap, the secondary program on the second monitor can cover it up if it has focus. If you maximize it, and if you dock, well, then the resource bar is always going to be docked and own its own real estate. And then if you try to maximize the other program, it only maximize up to the resource bar, will not cover it. Excuse me. The middle mouse wheel zoom, by default in NX10, you'll notice that when you now zoom with the middle mouse wheel, in other words, you scroll forward, it zooms in. If to zoom out, you scroll backwards. So this behavior has switched a little bit than what you've had in the past, but you'll notice that in the customer defaults, you can actually change what preference you want. So the forward to zoom in, backward to zoom in, depending on which way you want to do the mouse scrolling. Some enhancements with coordinate systems and even the view triad. There's some options for how you see it through the model versus fixed size on the screen. I'll turn these on and off for you. In other words, if you look, you'll see that here we have a model. If you look at the left, it's a fixed size on the screen, so if I zoom in and out, right, that stays the fixed size, whereas if I turn that off, then that's able to adjust, so to speak. And I'll show you what I mean there. As far as the show through, you'll probably notice that you can see that this model is covering up the coordinate system. So here in red is what's outside of the model, but you can still see the faint datum planes of that coordinate system and the other datum axis because show through is on. If you turn that off, you're only going to be able to see that parts of the datum coordinate system that are outside of the model. So you have a little bit of control here in your visualization preferences. And then finally, excuse me. And finally here, there's now touchscreen support. So there's certain roles that help with touchscreen. You see there's a role for touch panel or touch tablet. If you're running NX, which you have the ability to do now, on a tablet, for example, or anything touchscreen, you'll see that there are touchscreen gestures, meaning I can, pick commands with my finger, I can rotate, zoom, etc. with my fingers with touch. You can hit two fingers at the same time to double tap to accept a function like an OK or apply. You see also there's the ability to have a number pad come up inside of NX, so if you're not working with the keyboard. And just in general, one thing I want to point out, up here across the quick access toolbar, there's a touch mode which adds a little more space around the user interface so you can tap them more easily, right? Especially somebody like myself who has big fat fingers. That helps tremendously. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. If you are more interested, I put the YouTube link. This is to the Siemens PLM YouTube channel, and there's a nice video here of a demo with the touchscreen. Just to give you an idea what that looks like, I'll just go ahead and grab the link. And if you go to YouTube and do touchscreen CAD on tablet and NX10, and I'm just on the Siemens PLM channel, you can actually watch that demo. Alright, so let's work through a few things here. Alright, so here, first of all, like I said, if you've already loaded NX9, you're familiar with the ribbon layout, the new theme, the color scheme, I should say. One thing I do want to point out for NX9 and 10, I guess as a reminder, one thing that's changed here in 10, you'll notice that when I go to File, I have Preferences over here. In NX9, you went to All Preferences and another flyout. Just some things to make accessing the menus a little more handy. If I go to Preferences User Interface, here's the new layout for the user interface preferences. And once I mentioned earlier in NX9, you may be more familiar with these because of the drafting tools, the drafting menus. But first of all, up here at Layout, you'll see that user interface environment, you can have the ribbon bar or classic bars. So once again, for NX9 and 10, you do have the ability to turn back to the classic toolbars, right, the old pull-down menus. However, I encourage you to start using it and playing with and getting used to the ribbon bar, because that functionality is going away. There's for NX9 and 10, giving you the ability to switch back to the classic toolbars, but moving forward with NX11, we're going to be a ribbon. So I encourage you to use the ribbon. I like the ribbon, especially if everybody's using newer Microsoft Office tools. You're probably not still back on 2003 with the old pull-down menus. So a lot of things that we use in day-to-day have the new ribbon, the tabs. So that's just a friendly reminder. The other thing we want to look at here is the recently used. So I mentioned there's some enhancements. So if I go into customize, so right now I'm in customize, right? Same customize that we're used to. If I right click up here and, for example, this sketch curve gallery, you'll see that there's some options down here for content and style. How do I want to format these columns? What size icons for these styles? What in the ribbon and the pop-up. So a lot of control over here with the flavor of the icons. The other thing I want to point out is this recently used. So I've turned on the recently used here for sketch curves. So that's on. If you come over here and look at this recently used, this is on out of the box. So if I come up here to more, you'll see that I have recently used this delete body. Now keep in mind I'm still in customize, but when I get out you'll see that. So I just want to point out a few things like that. The recently used and the content and style for the ribbon. And once again, if you go back to our NX9 Lunch Bytes, we talked a lot about the user interface and being able to customize tabs, being able to customize these groups like these feature, what a gallery is, and etc. The other thing I want to point out is the search. So on my slide I had something like snap view. So if I type in snap, you see things like snap to grid, allow snap closest point, clear snap point, etc. Well, snap view is something that you may be used to, you may be used to doing with F8, right, for it to square up. So maybe I want to put snap view on a radio button. Right, so maybe I go to my one radio button. Well, I can come up here, type in snap. I use snap view all the time. Maybe I want to put this down here at 6 o'clock on my radio button. I'm going to go ahead and hit close. So now my right click with control shift, because that's the radio button. Once again, if I do a control shift, hold my left mouse button down, go down to snap view, I can now do it like that rather than you may be used to doing F8. So that search allows us to not only find the commands a little easier, but also to find commands that maybe are not necessarily in the ribbon. Alright, the next thing I want to point out is over here the resource bar options. Notice this little settings, little gear up here, like we have in other areas of NX. I can still do the pen open, pen close. If you're not familiar with that, right now it's set to pen open, so the resource bar stays docked and out in view here. So if I come in here and turn off pen open, see how it maximizes my screen real estate, and then whenever I come over the part navigator, click off, that's what it means to pen if you're not familiar with that. You can also maximize a tab, which we also see this here. So if I was in the part navigator or even in the assembly navigator, I can quickly maximize and minimize. That's nice, so you're not constantly just dragging this guy over and back. You can just do the maximize and minimize. I really like that enhancement, especially with the assembly navigator. If I come over here, right now here's the display on the left. I could display it on the right just like we could in previous versions. We just have the control here. But like I said, I can't show you here the second monitor, but if I overlap on the second monitor, now this will go over to my second monitor. I am hooked up to a second monitor, but you can't see it. So over here it's on my left side of my second monitor if my primary, what you're watching, is my left monitor. I'm going to go ahead and put this back to the left so you can see it. And then same thing with the dock, that'll put that over to the second monitor, and that'll stay docked. And like I said, it'll hold its real estate. It will not be covered up whenever you do the dock. Okay, so if you have dual monitors and you get NX10 loaded, I want you to be aware of those two options to quickly push the resource bar over to that second monitor. The other thing is, and I've heard this question before, is what if I want to turn off certain tabs in here? You know, I'm a CAD guy. I don't need to see the manufacturing wizards or system scenes or whatever it may be. You see that I can come in here and turn off the manufacturing wizard. So I have control on what tabs I want to turn on and off. Okay, you'll notice over here at the center of my screen I have my cursor. Notice if I scroll forward, I'm just rolling my scroll wheel towards my screen. It's zooming out, whereas if I scroll it back or towards me, it's zooming in. This is the same way if you're used to using the left mouse button and middle mouse button. If I pull towards me or back, right, it's zooming in. If I push away, it's zooming out. And you'll notice that underneath Utilities, Custom Defaults, go to Gateway, there's View Operations. You have control of which way you want that to be, whether the forward to zoom in or backward to zoom in. Alright, and the final thing, I mentioned it on the slide, is the visibility of coordinate systems in the view triad. So if I go to my preferences, visualization, and go to view screen, you'll see that we still have the show view triad like we've had before, which will just turn that on and off. But you'll notice that you can have it on the left or the right, so you have a little more control of where you actually place that. The other thing here is you have the coordinate system display properties. So right now it's show through and fixed size on screen. So show through, you see that, you know, anything that's sticking out of the model you can see, but then you also see what's hidden because it's show through. If I turn that off and hit apply, you'll see that only basically the little piece of my coordinate system at the very top is what I can see. So if I turn that back on, I can see it through again. As far as the fixed size on the screen, notice whenever I zoom my model way out or I zoom it way in, it's a fixed size on the screen, whereas if I turn that off, as I zoom that out, it gets small just like the model, or as I zoom that in, it gets big just like the model. It's almost like it's a fixed size relative to space, right, relative to the model. Whereas here, if I turn fixed size on screen back on, right, then it's going to stay the same size no matter how I zoom and pan around. Okay, so I don't want to spend all of our session on user interface, but I wanted to point out a few of those items, especially some things with the ribbon and the resource bar to allow our user interface to be more flexible and configurable. The next thing we want to take a look at is what's new in sketching environment. So the first thing we're going to look at is a few 2D synchronous enhancements. We're going to look at a new command called optimize 2D curve, which I think is going to be very popular and helpful. And then also how to create wavelengths on the fly inside of a sketch using dimensions and geometric constraints. So just roughly here what we're going to talk about as far as the 2D synchronous enhancements. We're going to look at a new command called resize chamfer curve. There's some new curve finder rules like select offset, select coincident vertex, select vertex on curve, and select chamfer are a few. 2D synchronous control. Basically, how as we move this curve inside the sketch, how is it going to behave? And if you remember back to NX9, this 2D synchronous idea can be used with our NX constrained profiles, but also can be used on imported geometry, which is very helpful. So we'll take a look at those options. The other command we want to look at is the optimize 2D curve. It's very helpful for imported curve geometry. It's going to clean and simplify basically. Very nice for 2D imported geometry. What it does is it looks at tolerances. There's a distance and an angle threshold, and it determines how it's going to clean up. In other words, how it cleans up curves and points. Is it going to remove overlapping curve chains, remove small curve segments that's too tiny? In other words, it would be, if it's a 3D model, it'd be like a little sliver, right? Removes points if the include point option is also active. It also simplifies spines and conic curves within that threshold, right? So instead of having a complex spline type curve, it'll change it to lines and arcs and more analytical shapes if it fits within that threshold. It aligns arcs and circles, so it helps us close profiles. And also there's a create a sketch option, so that if there's not already a sketch, it's just imported curves, it'll make it a sketch as it cleans it. So it's going to help us reduce rework and clean up imported geometry. And here's some screenshots. I'm going to go through this live for you. Another thing we want to look at is being able to create wavelengths on the fly inside a sketch. So if you're creating interpart links today, you know that in NX we do wavelengths, W-A-V-E. In this case, what this is going to allow us to do is create wavelengths on the fly while inside the rapid dimension command in geometric constraints. So we'll take a look at all those items. Alright, the first thing we want to take a look at is the 2D synchronous ideas. So I'm just going to edit into this sketch, and you see that I have some chamfer shapes, some arcs down here, and so forth. But I don't have any dimensions on here. Also, looking at this line, you don't know if I actually used the chamfer command to create this or if I just drew a line. Okay, so when we talk about the 2D synchronous tools, we're talking about these commands. Move curve, offset move curve, resize chamfer curve, and delete curve. So these were introduced in NX9. In NX10, we've added resize chamfer curve as well as some options here with move curve. So if I go into move curve, and think about what we're doing with synchronous modeling, but here we're just applying it to the 2D aspect. So as I start to pull this in, there's no control about how it's going to behave with that chamfer. But you'll notice over here in the curve finder, they've added this chamfer. So if it realizes that this line here could be intersected with this line, and there's a 45-degree chamfer or an equal setback chamfer, however you want to describe it there, it will recognize that. So if I turn that on, not only does it recognize the chamfer at the top, but the bottom, and see how just by moving that one line, it maintains that chamfer. Also, the new command resize chamfer curve would allow us to come in and grab that chamfer and adjust the setback and see how it's doing an equal setback to maintain that 45-degree angle. So then I could type in a value, which is very handy if I imported this sketch or these curves. The other enhancement that has been made is with the move curve command. If you think about it, I'm just going to reset my dialog, and I come in here and I just start to move this. Well, once again, there's no constraints on this. This is just imported geometry. Whereas I start to move this, you know, I may need some flexibility to get some different results. And what I mean by that is, notice as I pull this line back and forth, the actual chamfer above it, how it's actually shortening that angled line and extending that angled line if I move to the left. Well, by default, there's an option called trim and extend. So in NX10, these options were added to how the geometry, how the adjacent geometry updates and configures around that change. If I change this over to maintain, notice as I move this left and right, the angled face above is adapting to allow my select set, the vertical line, to maintain the same length. If I go back to trim and extend, see how this length is adjusting and the adjacent geometry is maintaining the same angle, if you will. So once again, if I go to maintain, see how it's maintaining the length of the line in my select set, and the background geometry is adjusting to allow it. So what this does, what these options do, is give us the ability to have some flexibility when we're making a change to allow adjacent geometry to adapt or not adapt, depending on what our desired change is. If I come back into the move curve again and I grab this arc, for example, you'll see the settings. There's also this keep orthogonal. So if I start moving this arc out, see how it's keeping this line vertical. Whereas if I turn off keep orthogonal, see how now that's able to adapt, and it doesn't have to stay orthogonal. In this case, it doesn't have to stay vertical. So some options here underneath settings that you can tweak as you're doing the move curve to get your desired result. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open up excuse me, I'm going to go and open up a step file. And what I'm doing is importing some curves, and I'm sure everybody's received some kind of geometry like this from one format or another, where there's just some areas in it where it's just not working. Meaning, if I were to come up here and try to extrude this, and I'm just going to go ahead and grab all these curves. Notice I don't have a sketch at this point. I'm just grabbing all the curves. It's saying the input section is not valid. Well, if we start looking at this a little more, I have a line here, but I actually anticipated this line to go all the way across to this arc. But there's actually two lines here, and if I hold quick pick here, you also see that there's two lines that are overlapping. Right? So we also have half arcs and some other geometry that needs cleaned up. So what we're going to do is we're going to run the new command, optimize 2D curve. Here I'm running it underneath the curve command, but you could also already have curves on a sketch and run the optimize 2D curve command inside of an existing sketch. So keep that in mind. Here, because I do not have an existing sketch, I'm going to run it here, and I want to point out this option here to create the sketch. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and window select my 2D geometry that I want to optimize. Because I want to create a sketch on the fly, I'm going to create sketch, and I can obviously specify where that coordinate system is going to be. And then here's where you control the threshold for both distance and angle. So this is basically the tolerance to how this profile, these set of curves, can be cleaned up and still maintain desired shape. So all I'm going to do is hit OK, and not only did it create the sketch, but notice up here on the top now, I only have one line. Right? It removed the duplicates, it cleaned that up. That's a nice clean set profile now. So I could come in and extrude it now, especially since it's a nice clean sketch. Right? I could grab even the feature curves and extrude that one time. The bottom line is using the optimized 2D curve allows us to clean up geometry, 2D geometry, a lot easier and not have to manually go in there and connect edges and rip corners and or close corners, I should say, etc. So it's a very, very handy tool. The final thing we want to take a look at is creating wavelengths on the fly within dimensions and geometric constraints. So here I have a base part, I have the sheet metal part, and I want to create another part, a cover over it, inside of a context via assembly. Right now I do not have the assembly, so I'm just going to go over here and create a new parent. This will be my top level assembly. And then I'm going to create a new component, in this case a sheet metal component, that'll be the cover. So now I have my assembly structure, I have the base part, and then I have the new cover, which will be the part I'm going to create. So I'm going to make that the work part. And this cover is going to look kind of like an open box. When I say open, the ends are going to be open, but it's going to fit over top of this other sheet metal part. The first thing I'm going to do, just because I'm in sheet metal, is go ahead and set up my gauge parameters, my thickness parameters and bends. And then I'm going to come in here and just create a sketch. Alright, so as I look at this, this is going to be my basic shape of my profile for my sheet metal part. There's going to be bends up here in the corner similar to what you see here in both corners, but it's going to be open on the bottom, and it's just a three-sided sheet metal part. So if I look at this, I want this outer profile to be associative back to the base part, therefore creating an inner part link. And as you know, we would use wave, W-A-V-E, to do so. So the enhancement here, one of the enhancements is, if you notice, if I just go straight to rapid dimension, I can change this filter to entire assembly. And I don't know if anybody's ever paid attention to this button, but in NX8, this create inner part link button was added in certain commands. Well, here it's also here with entire assembly for rapid dimension. So that allows me to come in and grab an edge on the fly, and it'll tell me that it's going to be a wave link, and apply that dimension to the wave link on the fly. I didn't have to do a series of wavelength commands first. You'll notice it has a linked composite curve. Same thing on the other side. If I grab the edge in my dimension line or my sketch line, I can come over here and apply that. So what I'm doing is having a 0.5 millimeter clearance between the sketch and the outside of the part. At the top, I want this top horizontal line to be collinear or flush with the top of those flanges. So if I come over here to geometric constraints, I can come up here and let's just do a collinear. Notice I have the entire assembly filter selected as well as create inner part link. So if I grab this line and make it collinear to that edge, that's going to create another wavelength. If I want the height of this new part to be controlled with constraints as well, I can come back into geometric constraints. Maybe we'll do a point on curve. Once again, I have create inner part link selected. So I can come in there and build these relationships in wavelengths on the fly very quickly. So there I have my profile. I use dimensions and constraints. I'm going to go ahead and create a contour flange from that. Excuse me. And I'm going to just change this to connected curves quickly. Grab that. I want my profile, my thickness to be outside of the sketch since I made that top line collinear to the top edge here, right? So the material thickness is to the outside. And make that symmetric because I had the sketch on center. And while I'm at it, let's just go ahead and do a measurement just to make it associative for the length as well. So that's going to measure 200 millimeters. So here we've created our part that caps over the top. So I went back to the assembly level. So I have some inner part links between dimensions and constraints so that the cover changes if the chassis changes. So if I go into that base sheet metal part and go in there and change my sketch, maybe the height here, I want this to be 55. So notice how this part updated, but also notice as I make these changes, go ahead and make this a little wider, and notice that the cover is also updating. So that allows us to quickly create inner part links as we do dimensions and constraints to other parts. Alright, the next area we're going to take a look at is the sheet metal environment. A few things to note here. It's easier to define gussets in folded and unfolded states. You'll notice that there's now a use of the datum plane. We'll take a look at that. You can create flanges on an existing contour flange or a hem flange, which gives us some flexibility there as well. And there's also some improvements to a bend taper. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Alright, let me go ahead and grab a file here. So here I have just a tab and I have a sketch, and what I'm going to do is create a contour flange as a secondary flange. Go ahead and hit reset on dialog. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this profile and basically sweep it along that existing edge. So let's go ahead and change this to chain. We'll just sweep it along that edge. So I have a contour flange around that edge. So if you're not familiar with hem flange, there's different types. You see closed, open, S-type, curl, etc. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and apply a hem to this edge, which is just a special shaped contour flange really. And what you're going to notice here now with NX10 is I can go to the flange command, and even on an existing contour flange I can apply a new flange. Maybe I want to center it down that side and apply my normal flange parameters. If I come over here on the existing hem, go ahead and apply that there, you see that I've also created a flange over there. So if I come up to my flat solid or my flat pattern, you'll see the results. So like I said, the enhancement is that you can now pull flanges off of existing contour flanges and hem flanges. The next thing we'll take a look at here is the enhancements to the gusset command. So if I come up here underneath the deformation features, you'll see the gusset. As far as the gusset, we've had gusset for a while. You'll see there's an automatic profile and a user-defined profile. But basically all you do is you grab a bend. Well, in the past versions, it would go ahead and put a default gusset where you clicked on that bend and then you could adjust it. You could actually even pattern it, do a fill type pattern, or basically saying I want 2 gussets equally spaced across the bend, or 3 gussets with this amount of spacing, etc. But now you'll see that in NX10 it wants us to specify a plane. So from any reference I can specify a plane. I'm going to go ahead and flip that direction and just start pushing that plane. You see wherever the plane is, you can apply that gusset. So if I want one 2 inches down from that face, I've basically created an offset plane using the inferred option to apply that gusset. So that's where that gets created. Now, as I mentioned in previous versions, you could go ahead and pattern right inside the gusset command, but in NX10 and even in NX9 we went through it with new versions that you can actually pattern features. So for a couple versions now we can pattern sheet metal features. So because we have the pattern functionality here, we can just do our normal pattern featuring commands. We don't need to be able to pattern it inside the gusset. So with that, we took a look at using a plane to define the gusset now in NX10. The final thing we want to take a look at here for sheet metal is some bend taper enhancements. So up here you'll notice there's a bend taper command. It creates a bend taper on either one or both sides of a bend or web faces. So what this wants us to do, and this bend taper has been around, but I'll show you the enhancements here in a minute. If I go ahead and grab this face and then what bend I want the taper to be, I'm going to go ahead and change this to symmetric. You'll notice that we have a little more options as far as how we taper the bend or taper from the web. But the other big enhancement here is that we can add negative values. So instead of it having to taper inwards, you'll see with these negative values it will taper outwards. So now we've added an outward taper we're using bend taper. The next section we're going to talk about is what's new in modeling. Here I've picked out a couple of things for the entire audience. Like I said, there are more items in that, so I encourage you to look at the What's New guide, which I'll talk about later. But in this case, we're going to look at something called Face Snapshot and some Edge Blend enhancements. First of all, this Face Snapshot, or what you'll see me reference Show Previous State, is a real nice tool to help us diagnose different parametric models, right? Parametric meaning we build these models with long history trees, and a face gets consumed, or something happens in the tree and we need to go back through and repair that or fix that object. So what this is going to do is show us the previous state of the model for that particular feature. It saves time by enabling you to help find the problem areas quickly and easily. So here on this screenshot, and I'll show you this live, you see that I've enabled a button here called Show Previous State. So something happened with this draft feature because something higher in the tree happened, and we need to determine what that previous state was. By clicking this button, it'll show you what that face looks like. For this enhancement, for that Show Previous State to show up, you need to do an option called fast rollback and previous state of failed feature being saved. Okay, so there's an old option, save data for fast rollback on edit, and that's in the customer defaults, has been replaced by new saved data for feature edit, and then that gives us the options of none, fast rollback, or fast rollback with previous state of failed feature. So that previous state of failed feature is what's being stored for me to get that previous state button. Features that are currently supported for this previous state preview is the face blend command, offset face, trim body, draft, trim and extend, trim sheet, delete face, and draft body. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. Also in NX10 there are some edge blend enhancements. These are really nice. They enhance the edge blend to be able to do a G2 curvature continuous condition. Alright, so if you think to edge blend here, underneath around select edge for shape, we had the rolling ball and then the conical shape. We still have that, but now you'll see that you can do the normal G1 tangent, or you can also do G2 curvature continuous, which is nice to be able to have that function or that flexibility just in your normal edge blend command. You don't have to necessarily go to a face blend to get curvature continuous now. Obviously face blend's still there, but you don't necessarily have to. So this curvature continuous, you see we've turned on the zebra striping to be able to show the continuity. So here's a face, and then through here's the blend region. So with this the normal default tangent, you see that obviously there's tangency there, but it's kind of a sharp transition, right? It has a little bit of a change in direction. Whereas if you do the edge blend with G2 curvature continuous, notice the transition and the curvature is much smoother for that particular Class A surface we're trying to get. So that's giving us the real or a better aesthetic reflection quality. Also, there's a new option in the settings called called segment blend to match face segments. So down here you see we have a certain part, and with this option turned on, segment blend to match face segments, see how not only the faces, how they're segmented, but now the blend matches that as well. Whereas here with that off, see how it's just a smooth blend. There's no segments in there matching the faces. So a couple options in edge blend that you can quickly get the desired result you need. So let's go ahead and take a look at the previous state part. Alright, bear with me one second. I'm going to go ahead and grab the part I had on the slide. Okay, so if we look at this history tree, we have an extruded base, the faces were drafted, then there was a trim body. So if I look at this trim body, I just put a datum plane here on this drafted face and trim that off. So maybe we come along and we determine that we need to reorder the history tree to get a different result. So I want the trim body to occur before the draft. So whenever I pull the trim body above the draft, we get a message about a face being consumed. Right? You get the little caution here. Right? Because obviously that face that I want to draft that was selected in the draft command doesn't really exist if it's been trimmed away. So when we look at what's being consumed, this is the first way that we go to figure out what needs changed in our model. We can look at the little caution that's been consumed. If I double click to edit that feature, now you'll notice that this button has been applied for the show previous state. So if I click this show previous state, it shows how the faces were when the draft command was initially created. So then that allows me to understand what face has been consumed and lead me in the right direction to fix that. Okay? If I get rid of these, you'll see that these were the faces, and obviously whenever I applied the draft, that would be that previous state. The customer defaults that I was talking about, if I go into my customer defaults and go to Gateway, and on General, make sure you're on the Part tab, you see now it's the options called Save Data for Feature Edit And there's three options there: none, fast rollback, or fast rollback in previous state of failed feature. Well, that previous state of failed feature is what gives me that button to show the previous state, as I showed you inside of the draft command. So pretty simple idea. I just want to show you the options it takes to turn that on and roughly what that's trying to accomplish. Alright, the final section we want to talk about is what's new in synchronous modeling for NX10. We talked about a couple tools earlier. We talked about the 2D synchronous and the resize chamfer and some options there with move curve from a 2D perspective. We also talked about optimize curve, optimize 2D curve that is, which if you think about it, if that transitions into a solid, that would also help you with the synchronous idea, being able to move a face cleanly, etc. So the two things we want to point out here for synchronous modeling is now with replace face, we can do that to a datum plane, which is very handy. And also the delete face, there's a new option to be able to define how you delete a face edge blend preference, meaning for a notch blend or a cliff blend, and I'll show you what that means. So let's go ahead and just jump into that. First of all, the delete blend for the notch blend or cliff blend, if you'll notice the set of blends that are on here, this is an imported model. This blend actually reaches the top of that. There's no face, right? There's no little short face before the blend transitions. So if I come up to my synchronous tools and I try to do a delete face, and I just do a delete face, whenever I delete that, I get some kind of different result where I actually wanted to delete that blend. So I'm going to come back into delete face and grab the blend option, and underneath settings you'll see here are the new options. Face edge blend preference, you want to delete as a notch or delete as a cliff. So you notice the little tooltips are pretty good. Delete as notch. It treats that face to edge blend as a notch blend if the notch or cliff cannot be determined. So it's going to reconstruct a face where it's consumed by the notch blend. If I go to cliff, you'll see that it treats the face to edge blend as a cliff blend if the notch or cliff cannot be determined. Delete the cliff will construct a face with the sharp edge location. Okay, so if I keep this on cliff and I try to delete that chain, it's not helping me there. But if I change that to notch and it treats it as a notch, you'll see that it is able to delete that blend and heal and stitch it. So once again, notice there are other options to help delete blends as a notch or a cliff that I want to make you aware of. If I come over here and look at another file for replace face, you'll see that first of all, if you're not familiar with replace face, it's actually one of my favorite commands inside of NX. It's very powerful. So if I come up here and do a replace face, and I say I want to grab this face on the top of this solid block and replace it with this surface that has contour, hit OK, I can hide the surface and you'll see the result I have. Right? It's a very quick way of creating complex shapes on solid models. Okay? Now I also have a datum plane. So you see I have this datum plane up here, and even though that datum plane is flat and then I have a curvature shape, with replace face I can say I want to replace this face up to a datum plane. In previous versions we could not select a datum plane. So notice how it's able to move up to that face, which also allows us to heal some geometry by replacing a face to a neighbor face. In this case a datum plane as well, which is very handy. This datum plane, it is associative to it, so if I come in here and move the datum plane, obviously the replace face is going to update. Even if I come in here to the datum plane and I change this to at angle just to give it a little different shape, I'm going to go ahead and create another angled plane here. Maybe I'll offset it at the same time. Notice the shape, right? So it is fully associative to that particular datum plane. So with replace face we can use datum planes as replacement faces, which is which is pretty handy. Alright, for more information, obviously we'll be doing our part 2 of what's new in 10 coming up on May 21st. But make sure your NX10 help is installed, and you can go to Help, What's New Guide, and you can click on Fundamentals in CAD on the left and look at all the other tools. There's actually a lot of enhancements in CAE if you are in that particular area inside of NX as well. So our agenda, we got through user interface, sketching, sheet metal, modeling, and synchronous modeling. On part 2, we're going to cover what's new in assemblies and drafting. And inside of drafting, there's some tools called NX Layout. If you're specifically wondering about those or have heard about those, we will cover those on May 21st. For those of you wondering, we do have our upcoming training offerings here at Ally PLM, our Essentials class, our Advanced Techniques classes for both CAD and CAM are going on. We also do NX update classes, so we have a lot of customers asking us, hey, we're moving from NX 8.5 to NX 10 or NX 8 to NX 9. So we can also teach that type of agenda as well. So just go to our website if you want to look at more information on that. Our replays, as always, you can go to our website and click on Lunch Bytes Replays. You can also suggest a topic for NX Lunch Bytes. Our upcoming Lunch Bytes topics are there. Just go to our website for more information there. Remember that part 2 of what's new in NX10 CAD will be on May 21st. I thank all of you for putting up with my coughing and probably not being able to talk, and hopefully I was clear enough for you to get something out of this presentation. If you have any questions, let us know. You can send those to us via email. Thanks for your attention this afternoon. Once again, please let us know your suggestions for future Lunch Bytes topics. You can suggest those on the website. And thanks, and have a great afternoon.